Black girl's head shaved by teacher. Then her mother walked in and changed everything. The clippers roared to life with a mechanical buzz, like a warning siren. Layla Monroe, only 12 years old, sat frozen in the nurse's chair, her wide brown eyes locked onto the mirror across the room. She could see the reflection of Miss Fitch, stern, thin-lipped, her hand wrapped tight around the humming device, as she approached from behind with the cool detachment of someone preparing to fix a broken appliance. "Don't move," Miss Fitch said with a false calm that chilled the room. "I have a medical condition," Layla choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "My mom, she filed the forms, please." But her pleas were drowned out by the angry growl of the clippers making their first pass. One long braid, carefully twisted and secured that morning, slid off her shoulder and dropped to the floor like a fallen leaf. Then another. Then another. "No, please, stop," Layla whimpered. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks now, mixing with the clumps of hair that stuck to her shirt. She reached up instinctively to shield her head, but Miss Fitch gently, almost mockingly, pushed her hands down. "This is for your own good," the teacher said flatly. "Rules are rules." Nurse Teresa Lawson stood nearby, her face tight with discomfort. She had hesitated. God, she had hesitated, but the fear of losing her job had paralyzed her. Now, with every clip of the blade, her stomach twisted deeper in regret. Layla's scalp, patchy and red from alopecia, was exposed with each pass, raw and vulnerable. Miss Fitch turned off the clippers with a satisfied click. There, much better. Layla couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her hands hovered inches from her bare head, shaking uncontrollably. "I'll give you 5 minutes to collect yourself," Miss Fitch said, as if Layla had merely spilled juice on her shirt. Then she turned to the nurse and added, "Make sure she's back in class by 3rd period." As the door shut behind her, Nurse Lawson finally moved, grabbing a soft towel and kneeling beside Layla. "Sweetheart, I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never thought she'd actually go through with it." Layla didn't respond. She couldn't. Her entire body felt like it had been hollowed out. Across the hallway in room 204, Maya Hayes sat with her phone in her lap, her face pale and fists clenched. She'd caught the last 30 seconds of the incident on video, just enough to see the clippers and Layla's expression of sheer panic. She hadn't meant to record it. She had meant to stop it. But now that she had it, she knew exactly what she needed to do. By the time 2nd period ended, Maya had already sent the video to someone halfway across the world. 5 hours earlier, before her world crumbled, Layla sat in algebra class, doodling a phoenix rising from flames in the margins of her notebook. Her braids swung forward, veiling part of her face, just how she liked it. The braids weren't just a fashion statement, they were armor, a carefully constructed shield covering the bald patches that alopecia had carved into her scalp since she was 9. "A little too fancy for school, don't you think?" A voice pierced the quiet. Layla looked up to find Miss Fitch standing over her desk, arms crossed. "I finished the assignment," Layla said softly, not meeting her teacher's eyes. "That doesn't mean you get to play Picasso," Miss Fitch sneered. She grabbed the notebook and flipped through the pages. "Birds? Girls with swords? Dragons? You do know this is algebra, not art therapy." Maya glanced nervously from across the aisle, mouthing, "Just ignore her." Miss Fitch set the notebook down and narrowed her eyes. "And these braids," she continued, "very expressive, but not in line with school guidelines, too flashy, too attention-seeking." "They're protective," Layla murmured, "for medical reasons." "Really?" Fitch raised an eyebrow. "Because I checked your file this morning. There's a medical note, sure, but nothing about needing braids that look like they belong on a runway." Layla felt her stomach twist. "My mom spoke to the principal. There's a form. Enough, Ms. Fitch snapped. Either take those out or you'll be escorted to the nurse. You're disrupting the learning environment. But Now, Layla. The classroom was dead silent. Even the clock seemed to pause. Layla stood, her chair scraping the floor behind her. As she followed Miss Fitch out the door, Maya began recording with trembling fingers, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what she was more afraid of, that this would escalate, or that no one else would believe what was happening. That night, nearly 7,000 miles away at a naval operations base in Qatar, Commander Rochelle Monroe sat in her quarters, reviewing logistics reports on encrypted tablets. Her deployment was 3 weeks from wrapping, and she hadn't seen Layla in almost 4 months. Her phone buzzed beside her with a new message from Ethan. "Call me ASAP. It's Layla. Something bad happened." Her heart dropped. Then came a second message. A video. Rochelle watched the 30-second clip without blinking once. She saw her daughter's face twist in fear, saw a woman press her down and shear her hair with clinical detachment. Her jaw clenched. She didn't cry, didn't gasp. She just stood, walked calmly to the radio room, and made a single call to her superior. "Sir, I'm invoking emergency family leave, effective immediately." The admiral on the other end didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Understood." By midnight, Rochelle Monroe was on a military transport jet headed for North Carolina, with one thing echoing in her mind over and over again. They didn't just humiliate a child. They declared war on her mother. The silence in the Monroe household that night was thicker than any sound could ever be. Layla hadn't said a word since her father, Ethan, picked her up from school. She'd walked to the car with her hoodie pulled tightly over her head, eyes locked on the sidewalk, her steps slow and robotic. Ethan had asked her twice if she was okay. She didn't answer. She just sat in the passenger seat with her hands clenched in her lap, like they were holding the pieces of her shattered dignity together. Now, hours later, she sat on the edge of her bed, the hood still up, her arms wrapped around her legs. Ethan stood outside her door, struggling to breathe through the storm building in his chest. He'd wanted to turn the car around the moment he saw her hair. He wanted to scream at someone, demand answers, burn the entire district down if he had to. But Layla needed him calm, grounded, and that was the hardest thing he'd ever done. "Sweetheart," he said through the door, voice gentle but raw. "I made dinner. Your favorite. Roast chicken and garlic mashed potatoes." No answer. He waited. "Okay, I'll leave a plate in the kitchen for you." Inside, Layla didn't move. The mirror across the room caught the faintest sliver of light, and for a moment she saw a girl she didn't recognize, a girl stripped of her armor, a girl with no defense. The hoodie suddenly felt suffocating, but she couldn't take it off. Not yet. Not when her scalp still tingled from the clippers. Not when she could still hear Miss Fitch's voice in her head, flat and cold. "There, much better." Her stomach turned. She curled up tighter and pressed her forehead to her knees. Downstairs, Ethan grabbed his phone and opened Rochelle's contact. He'd left 5 messages already. Still no reply. His fingers hovered over the screen, unsure what to say next, when a soft knock came at the door. Maya stood on the porch, her mom's car idling at the curb. "She's not answering her phone," Maya said quickly. "I brought this for her." In her hand was a small box wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a soft, hand-knitted cap in purple and gold, Layla's favorite colors. "My sister made it last year for chemo patients at the clinic," Maya added, eyes watering. "Layla doesn't have to wear it, but I thought maybe she'd want something soft, something that's hers." Ethan didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and took the box. As Maya turned to go, she paused. "I recorded what happened," she said without looking back. "Part of it. Not the whole thing. But enough. I sent it to Layla's mom." Ethan's head jerked up. You sent it to Rochelle? Maya nodded. She deserves to know. The school's not gonna tell her the truth. You know that, right? Ethan exhaled slowly. Yeah, I know. He watched Maya leave, then closed the door and leaned against it. Rochelle would see the footage. And then, God help them all. Halfway across the Atlantic, Rochelle stared at her screen in silence. The transport jet hummed beneath her boots, but all she could hear was her daughter's voice pleading. All she could see was Layla's shoulders shaking as each braid hit the floor. She watched the clip again, and again. Each time her jaw clenched tighter, her breath shallower. The child in that video wasn't just her daughter. She was every black girl who'd ever been punished for existing too loudly, too proudly, too uniquely. Rochelle closed the file and sat back. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She reached for her journal instead and scribbled one word at the top of a fresh page: strategy. The following morning at Lakeside Middle School, Principal Darrell Coates stood in front of a mirror adjusting his tie, trying to look unbothered. But his hands trembled. The video had made it onto Twitter sometime after midnight. By 6 a.m., Justice for Layla was trending in 3 states. By 7 a.m., his inbox was flooded with media inquiries. And by 8 a.m., the district superintendent was on the phone telling him, "Contain it. Do whatever you need to, Darrell. We can't afford another incident." He hung up and stared at his reflection. Another incident, he muttered bitterly. As if this was a broken locker or a fight in the cafeteria. Call me ASAP. It's Layla. Something bad happened. Her heart dropped. Then came a second message. A video. Rochelle watched the 30-second clip without blinking once. She saw her daughter's face twist in fear, saw a woman press her down and shear her hair with clinical detachment. Her jaw clenched. She didn't cry, didn't gasp. She just stood, walked calmly to the radio room, and made a single call to her superior. "Sir, I'm invoking emergency family leave, effective immediately." The admiral on the other end didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Understood." By midnight, Rochelle Monroe was on a military transport jet headed for North Carolina, with one thing echoing in her mind over and over again. They didn't just humiliate a child. They declared war on her mother. The silence in the Monroe household that night was thicker than any sound could ever be. Layla hadn't said a word since her father, Ethan, picked her up from school. She'd walked to the car with her hoodie pulled tightly over her head, eyes locked on the sidewalk, her steps slow and robotic. Ethan had asked her twice if she was okay. She didn't answer. She just sat in the passenger seat with her hands clenched in her lap, like they were holding the pieces of her shattered dignity together. Now, hours later, she sat on the edge of her bed, the hood still up, her arms wrapped around her legs. Ethan stood outside her door, struggling to breathe through the storm building in his chest. He'd wanted to turn the car around the moment he saw her hair. He wanted to scream at someone, demand answers, burn the entire district down if he had to. But Layla needed him calm, grounded, and that was the hardest thing he'd ever done. "Sweetheart," he said through the door, voice gentle but raw. "I made dinner. Your favorite, roast chicken and garlic mashed potatoes." No answer. He waited. "Okay, I'll leave a plate in the kitchen for you." Inside, Layla didn't move. The mirror across the room caught the faintest sliver of light, and for a moment she saw a girl she didn't recognize, a girl stripped of her armor, a girl with no defense. The hoodie suddenly felt suffocating, but she couldn't take it off. Not yet. Not when her scalp still tingled from the clippers. Not when she could still hear Miss Fitch's voice in her head, flat and cold. "There, much better." Her stomach turned. She curled up tighter and pressed her forehead to her knees. Downstairs, Ethan grabbed his phone and opened Rochelle's contact. He'd left 5 messages already. Still no reply. His fingers hovered over the screen, unsure what to say next, when a soft knock came at the door. Maya stood on the porch, her mom's car idling at the curb. "She's not answering her phone," Maya said quickly. "I brought this for her." In her hand was a small box wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a soft, hand-knitted cap in purple and gold, Layla's favorite colors. "My sister made it last year for chemo patients at the clinic," Maya added, eyes watering. "Layla doesn't have to wear it, but I thought maybe she'd want something soft, something that's hers." Ethan didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and took the box. As Maya turned to go, she paused. "I recorded what happened," she said without looking back. "Part of it. Not the whole thing. But enough. I sent it to Layla's mom." Ethan's head jerked up. "You sent it to Rochelle?" Maya nodded. "She deserves to know. The school's not gonna tell her the truth. You know that, right?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I know." He watched Maya leave, then closed the door and leaned against it. Rochelle would see the footage. And then, God help them all. Halfway across the Atlantic, Rochelle stared at her screen in silence. The transport jet hummed beneath her boots, but all she could hear was her daughter's voice pleading. All she could see was Layla's shoulders shaking as each braid hit the floor. She watched the clip again, and again. Each time her jaw clenched tighter, her breath shallower. The child in that video wasn't just her daughter. She was every black girl who'd ever been punished for existing too loudly, too proudly, too uniquely. Rochelle closed the file and sat back. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She reached for her journal instead and scribbled one word at the top of a fresh page: strategy. The following morning at Lakeside Middle School, Principal Daryl Coates stood in front of a mirror adjusting his tie, trying to look unbothered. But his hands trembled. The video had made it onto Twitter sometime after midnight. By 6 a.m., Justice for Layla was trending in 3 states. By 7 a.m., his inbox was flooded with media inquiries. And by 8 a.m., the district superintendent was on the phone telling him, "Contain it. Do whatever you need to, Daryl. We can't afford another incident." He hung up and stared at his reflection. "Another incident," he muttered bitterly. As if this was a broken locker or a fight in the cafeteria. He turned away from the mirror, grabbed his coffee, and made his way down to Ms. Fitch's classroom. "Evelyn," he said flatly when she opened the door, "we need to talk. Now." She smiled, falsely sweet. "Of course, Principal Coates. Let me just finish with my class." "No. Now." Her smile twitched. She stepped into the hallway and shut the door behind her. "I need to know what happened yesterday," Coates said without preamble. "All of it." "I enforced the dress code," she replied calmly, crossing her arms. "It was a clear violation. I followed procedure." "There's a video circulating," he said. "It shows you—" "There's no audio," she cut in, "so no one knows what was said. And I checked the student's file. There was no specific medical exemption for hair, so I was within my rights. Even if there was no note, which, by the way, we're still confirming, you thought shaving a child's head was reasonable." She was disruptive. Coates stared at her. "Do you have any idea what kind of firestorm you've started?" Miss Fitch didn't flinch. "It's being blown out of proportion because her mother's military. You'll see. This'll pass." "No," Coates said. "It won't." He turned and walked away before she could say another word. His hands trembled again. This wasn't going away. In a small house on the edge of town, Nurse Lawson stood at her kitchen sink, washing dishes with a kind of mechanical numbness. Her husband, Darren, entered the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You didn't sleep again," he said. "I kept seeing her face," she whispered. Darren placed a hand on her shoulder. "You tried to stop it." "No," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't. Not really. I should have stood between them. I should have said no. You're just one person, T, he said gently. You were scared. I was a coward. She dried her hands and reached for her phone. Then she opened her notes app. Tomorrow she would talk to someone. She would speak. She owed Layla that much. Back in Layla's room, the purple and gold cap rested on her nightstand. She hadn't touched it yet. Her arms still wrapped around her knees, her hoodie pulled low. But her eyes had found the sketch pad again. It lay open beside her, half covered in shadows. She reached for the pencil, and for the first time since the nurse's office, she drew. Not a phoenix, not a bird. This time she sketched a girl, bald, broken, but standing in fire. And she was not alone. Behind her stood a woman in uniform, shoulders squared, boots planted, hands clenched at her sides. Layla stared at the image. Her hand trembled. Then she whispered, almost too soft to hear, "Come home, Mom." She already was. The quiet hum of the jet engines barely registered in Rochelle Monroe's ears. She sat upright in her seat, her hands resting stiffly on her thighs as the military transport plane crossed the Atlantic, cutting through layers of cloud and time. Her eyes hadn't moved from the screen of her phone since the clip began looping. Layla's pleading, the buzz of clippers, Ms. Fitch's indifferent face, and finally, Layla's quiet collapse. Rochelle replayed the moment Layla's hand instinctively reached up to cover her scalp. That one movement haunted her. She wasn't just looking at her daughter. She was looking at a child who had been stripped of safety. And what chilled Rochelle wasn't only the teacher's actions. It was the system that stood by and allowed it. As the aircraft began its descent into Andrews Air Force Base, Rochelle pulled her cap low and gathered her duffel bag. Her uniform was pristine, polished, but her expression was something harder, sharpened by purpose. She wasn't here just to comfort her daughter. She was here for war. Back at Lakeside Middle School, the front office buzzed with a strained kind of nervous energy. Secretaries typed faster, eyes darting toward the main entrance each time the door creaked. Principal Coates had canceled his meetings for the day. He hadn't said why, but the rumor mill had already filled in the blanks. Layla's mother was coming. Ms. Fitch sat in the break room sipping lukewarm coffee, her posture stiff. A printed copy of the district's dress code policy rested beside her, highlighted and underlined. She had read it 6 times that morning, memorized every clause that could be bent to justify what she'd done. She needed to be ready, because deep down she knew Rochelle Monroe wasn't the kind of woman who'd cry quietly behind closed doors. Layla hadn't left her room that morning. She still couldn't, but for the first time in days, she was awake and alert. Her sketchbook rested in her lap, and the purple and gold cap Maya had brought was now on her head. It didn't hide the pain, but it felt like armor, soft, familiar, hers. A knock came at the bedroom door. Ethan opened it slowly. "She's here." Layla didn't move at first. Her breath caught in her throat. Then she slowly stood. The school parking lot was half empty when the dark gray sedan pulled up. Rochelle stepped out in her full military uniform. The late morning sun caught the silver eagle pinned to her collar, and her presence hit like a shockwave. She didn't march. She didn't rush. But every step toward the front entrance was deliberate, grounded. Students paused mid-conversation. Teachers glanced out windows and froze. Rochelle didn't meet anyone's eyes. She was focused. The front doors slid open, and the building held its breath. Principal Coates was already standing in the main office, wiping his palms against his slacks. He took one step toward Rochelle, attempting a composed smile. "Lieutenant Colonel Monroe." "Where is she?" Rochelle's voice was calm, controlled. "She's Layla's in her first period class," he replied quickly. "But we can call her out. Please, if you'd just like to—" "Not Layla, the teacher." Fitch Coates blinked. "Ms. Fitch is in a staff meeting right now, but if you'd like to speak privately, we can—" "I didn't fly across the ocean for privacy," Rochelle said. She turned and walked past him, down the hallway, past the rows of lockers. Students parted like waves around her. Word spread within seconds. Miss Fitch stood near the copy machine in the staff lounge when the door swung open. The conversation in the room evaporated as Rochelle stepped inside. Their eyes locked. "Evelyn Fitch," Rochelle said, her tone still level. Miss Fitch straightened, trying to mask her unease. "Yes? You shaved my daughter's head. I enforced a dress code violation. That's district policy." Rochelle didn't blink. "Let's be clear. You didn't send her home. You didn't call me or her father. You didn't document a medical consultation. You took clippers to a child's head." "She had no proof of a medical exemption," Ms. Fitch replied, her voice clipped. "The form was missing from her file." "That's a lie," Rochelle said. "I personally submitted it 3 months ago, signed by a board-certified dermatologist and approved by your district's own accommodations committee. You know what that means." Fitch hesitated. "It means you acted with full knowledge of her condition, and you still stripped her." Ms. Fitch shifted on her heels. "You're clearly emotional. Maybe we should—" "I'm not here as a mother today," Rochelle cut in. "I'm here as a military officer trained to handle abuses of power. I've led investigations into war crimes that were more humane than what you did to my daughter." The silence in the room turned to stone. "And when this goes public, and it will, you won't just be facing a suspension. You'll be facing legal consequences, civil and possibly criminal." Ms. Fitch's voice cracked. "You're threatening me." "No," Rochelle replied. "I'm reminding you, consequences exist, even for people like you." She turned and walked out. In the principal's office, Rochelle stood across from Coates. "You want to protect your school?" she asked. "Yes," he said quickly. "Of course." "Then stop hiding behind policy and fix the culture that allowed this to happen." He swallowed hard. "We are conducting a full internal review." Rochelle stepped closer. "I'm not interested in internal reviews. I'm interested in accountability." Then she left. That afternoon, social media exploded again. This time, it wasn't just the video. It was Rochelle's face captured in dozens of blurry photos from students' phones. The hashtags #Justice for Layla and #Monroe Strong were trending by evening. Military parents, civil rights activists, former students, teachers from other states. Everyone had something to say. And beneath all the noise, a question grew louder. What happens next? Back home, Layla sat beside her mom on the couch. For the first time, Rochelle didn't try to say the right thing. She just sat there, their hands intertwined. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," Rochelle said softly. "You're here now," Layla whispered. Then she leaned against her mother's shoulder and exhaled. It was still dark outside when Rochelle sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, files spread out across the surface like a war map. Her uniform jacket hung over the back of her chair, and a half-drunk cup of coffee had long gone cold. The entire night had passed without sleep, but Rochelle's mind was sharper than ever. She wasn't just going to confront the school. She was going to dismantle the wall they'd built to hide behind. Ethan entered quietly, rubbing his eyes. "You're still up?" "I needed to finish collecting everything," Rochelle said. "Emails, voicemails, medical documentation, the exemption letter. I even found a time-stamped call I made to the school nurse last month, confirming they had it on file." "You're building a case." "I'm building the truth, because clearly they weren't interested in it." Ethan hesitated, then sat across from her. "Are you sure this is the right move, going public? You saw what they did, and you saw how they tried to bury it. You think they'll fix it in private?" He exhaled, looking away. But I hate seeing Layla go through all this." "I hate it too," Rochelle said softly. but letting this slide teaches her that silence is safer than justice. Layla appeared in the doorway, hair wrapped in a scarf, her eyes tired but alert. "I want to help," she said quietly. Both parents looked at her. "I don't want to hide," she continued. "I want people to know what she did." Rochelle stood and walked over, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You don't have to speak until you're ready." Layla looked up at her mother. "I'm ready now." By mid-morning, Rochelle sat in the local news studio. The host, a poised woman in her early 40s, offered polite conversation during the mic check, but Rochelle kept her answers short. She was here to deliver facts, not pleasantries. When the red light on the camera blinked on, Rochelle looked directly into the lens, her voice calm but resonant. "My daughter, Layla Monroe, has a medical condition, alopecia areata. It causes significant hair loss and impacts not just her appearance, but her confidence and well-being. The school was informed of this months ago. We filed the proper paperwork. We followed every rule. And yet, her teacher forcibly shaved her head without permission or proper process." The anchor leaned forward. "The school says it's investigating." "That's not enough," Rochelle replied, "because this isn't about one bad decision. It's about a system that let it happen. It's about an environment where no one intervened, where a child's plea for dignity was ignored. And what would justice look like to you?" Rochelle paused. "Justice is my daughter walking into school without fear. It's consequences for those who use power to humiliate, and it's a system that doesn't require a military mother and national media to hold a teacher accountable." Within hours, the interview spread online. Clips circulated with titles like "Lieutenant Colonel Exposes School Scandal" and "Black Girl's Hair Shaved by Teacher. Mother Fights Back." Social media swelled with reactions, some supportive, some skeptical, and some deeply uncomfortable with the mirror Rochelle had held up to the system. Layla's story was no longer just hers. It had become a lightning rod. At Lakeside Middle, the mood shifted. Students whispered in hallways. Teachers lowered their voices. Ms. Fitch walked into the building flanked by the union rep, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. In a closed-door emergency meeting, the school board huddled around a projector playing Rochelle's interview. "This is getting out of control," murmured board member Alston. "She's undermining the credibility of the entire district," added another. Superintendent Bryant sat with his fingers steepled. "We've had issues with Fitch before." "Nothing this public." "We'll issue a statement," Bryant said at last, "reaffirming our commitment to a thorough investigation and student safety. No admissions, no specific names." "And what about the mother?" Bryant sighed. "Let's hope she's only here for the spotlight." Meanwhile, Layla sat with Maya in her room, watching the interview replay on Maya's phone. They were silent for a while. Then Maya said, "You were really brave." "I didn't feel brave." "That's the thing," Maya said. "Sometimes brave is just not hiding." Layla glanced toward the mirror, her reflection softened by the scarf, the curve of her cheek exposed, her eyes steady. "You think people will believe me? More people already do than you think." Later that evening, Rochelle received an anonymous message. It was a forwarded email thread. Attached was a scan of Layla's medical exemption, clearly stamped as received by the school's administration 2 months prior. The note below it was simple. They knew. They just ignored it. No name, no number, but enough to confirm what Rochelle had already suspected. There was a cover-up, and someone inside wanted it exposed. That night, Layla sat on the edge of her bed, sketchpad resting on her knees. For the first time since it happened, she began to draw again. Not the angry, jagged lines, not the dark spirals, but a single image. A girl standing in the middle of a school hallway, head bare, shoulders back, eyes straight ahead. The caption beneath it read, Still here, still me. The crowd outside the Lakeside Unified School District building had doubled overnight. What started with a few local parents holding hand-painted signs had transformed into a sea of supporters. Some held posters with Layla's sketch blown up, the words, "Still here, still me," printed boldly beneath. Others wore shirts that read, "Protect our children, not your image." Rochelle stood at the center of it all, flanked by community leaders, local clergy, veterans, and parents whose children had once walked the same hallways as Layla. There was a quiet solidarity in the way they gathered. No megaphones, no chaos, just presence and power. "Do you think they'll really listen this time?" Ethan asked her softly, eyes scanning the growing crowd. "They'll have no choice," Rochelle replied, "because this isn't just about Layla anymore." Inside the district offices, panic simmered just beneath the surface. Superintendent Bryant sat with his tie loosened, reviewing the media briefing with furrowed brows. "You're telling me there's a whistleblower now?" he snapped at his chief of staff. "There's an email. Rochelle Monroe posted it this morning. It's from someone on the inside. Says the school administration had the medical exemption and ignored it." "Damn it," he muttered, standing. "We can't contain this with PR anymore. What do you want to do?" Bryant paused, then said through clenched teeth, "We delay. Stall the investigation. Say we're bringing in third-party consultants. We need time to prepare for the fallout." "And the teacher?" "Fitch is on leave. That'll have to be enough. For now." But just as the district tried to slow things down, the pace outside accelerated. Later that afternoon, Rochelle received a direct message from a journalist at the Tribune, a respected investigative reporter named Jalen Whitaker. "Mrs. Monroe, I've been following your story. Off the record, someone just sent us a document that might interest you." Attached was a redacted internal memo from Principal Darnell to Superintendent Bryant dated 2 weeks before the incident. The subject, "Concerns regarding Ms. Fitch's pattern of disproportionate discipline toward students of color." Rochelle's hands shook. They had known, not just about Layla's condition, but about Ms. Fitch's behavior for months, maybe longer. She stared at the screen, the silence around her heavy. Then she dialed Grace Navarro, civil rights attorney and longtime family friend. "It's time," Rochelle said. "We're filing." That evening, Grace held a press conference. Reporters gathered on the courthouse steps, their recorders raised. "We have filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Monroe family against the Lakeside Unified School District and Ms. Helen Fitch for gross negligence, physical and emotional abuse, and violation of a minor's civil rights," Grace announced. She paused before delivering the line that would be quoted on every major news site by morning. They shaved her hair, but they underestimated her fire, and now that fire is going to burn through every lie they've tried to hide behind. Layla sat in her room that night, curled up with Maya on her bed. "They're all talking about you," Maya said, scrolling through her phone. "Like everyone." Layla didn't answer immediately. She stared at the wall where her newest drawing had just been taped up. It showed a bald girl walking through a corridor lined with adults who looked the other way. But in her hand she held a torch, bright, unstoppable. "You think it's too much?" Layla asked quietly. Maya glanced at the sketch. I think it's exactly what they need to see." Layla's eyes welled. "I'm scared sometimes." "That's okay," Maya said. "It just means you know how important this is." 2 days later, an emergency school board meeting was called. The boardroom was packed. Parents, press community members, and in the back row, Rochelle, Ethan, and Layla sat together, unwavering. Superintendent Bryant took the microphone. Due to recent developments, including the release of sensitive documents and pending litigation, We are officially launching an independent investigation into the events surrounding the incident involving Layla Monroe. He kept his eyes down, reading from a script. Furthermore, we acknowledge the growing concern from the community and commit to full transparency moving forward. It was meant to be damage control, but Rochelle stood before he could finish. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Since we're discussing transparency, will you be releasing the footage from the nurse's office? Or do you plan to keep hiding behind redactions and legal jargon while my daughter has to live with what you allowed?" Bryant opened his mouth but said nothing. "I didn't think so," Rochelle continued. "But just so we're clear, this isn't a request anymore. It's a warning. Every lie you bury, we'll dig up. Every file you misplace, we'll find. You underestimated one girl. You won't make that mistake again." A beat of silence followed. Then applause. And not polite applause. Real, thunderous, righteous applause. Even some teachers in the back row clapped. And as Rochelle sat down, Layla reached over, her voice barely audible but filled with awe. "Mom, you didn't just walk in. You set the whole place on fire." Rochelle smiled faintly, holding her daughter's hand. "They thought this was about a haircut," she said, "but we're just getting started." The video hit the internet like a lightning strike at midnight. It wasn't long or edited or polished. It didn't need to be. It was raw, shaky, silent, recorded from a corner security camera in the nurse's office. No sound, just Layla Monroe, sitting in that oversized vinyl chair, clutching the arms as Ms. Fitch circled behind her with clippers. Layla's mouth moved, clearly pleading. Fitch leaned in, spoke, turned on the clippers. The moment the first braid dropped to the floor, social media erupted. Justice for Layla started trending in under an hour. By sunrise, cable news anchors were already scrambling to get legal experts, education officials, and parents on air. But it wasn't the media that changed everything. It was the people. Parents showed up at the district building with their kids in tow. Teachers refused to start classes until the board responded. Alumni from the school, Black, Latino, Asian, white, posted stories of the quiet racism they had endured under Fitch and the administration that had protected her. Layla watched it unfold from the living room couch, wrapped in her mom's old army blanket, her eyes wide. Rochelle stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear, nodding as Grace spoke on the other end. "The footage confirms everything," Grace said. "We'll file an emergency injunction. That school will answer for what it allowed." Rochelle glanced at her daughter. "We don't just want answers, Grace. We want change." "You'll get both." Later that afternoon, a knock came at the front door. Rochelle opened it to find a tall, weary-looking man in a dark blazer. "Detective Ken Yates. I'm with Internal Affairs, Education Division," he said, flashing a badge. "I'd like to ask you and your daughter a few questions. Off the record. For now." Rochelle narrowed her eyes. "Why now?" "Because someone inside your school district just forwarded me a chain of emails," he replied. "And if what I've seen is real, there's a lot more going on than one teacher with a power trip." Rochelle stepped aside. "Come in." Over the next hour, Yates sat at their kitchen table as Rochelle and Layla walked him through everything. Layla's medical exemption, the ignored complaint, the clippers, the aftermath. When they finished, Yates pulled a manila folder from his briefcase. "I'm going to show you something, and I need you to tell me if any of these names are familiar." He spread out photocopies of memos, personnel reports, and discipline records, names redacted, but context still readable. Layla's eyes locked on one of them. "That's her handwriting," she said, pointing. "Ms. Fitch. That's how she signs her notes." Yates nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." Then he pulled out one last document, an internal memo from the school board president to Superintendent Bryant. Maintain support for Ms. Fitch. We cannot afford another public incident. Delay disciplinary review until after grant approval. Rochelle clenched her fists. So it was never about rules, she said. It was about money. Reputation Yates looked grim. Always is. Back at Lakeside, the walls were closing in. Ms. Fitch had gone silent. No press, no statements, just vanished behind a lawyer's office door. Principal Darnell tried to keep things moving, but the faculty was restless. Some had quietly deleted old emails. Others panicked about what might come next. Then came the twist no one saw coming. An anonymous source leaked a voice memo to the press. The audio was rough, recorded from a cell phone placed under a table. Fitch's voice was unmistakable. She's just like her mother. Thought she was special. Thought her braids made her untouchable. Well, now she knows. The backlash was nuclear. Superintendent Bryant resigned the next morning. The school board president followed by sunset. By week's end, 3 other administrators had lawyered up. But Rochelle wasn't satisfied with resignations. Not when Layla still jumped every time the doorbell rang. Not when her daughter hadn't picked up a pencil to draw in days. So she took the fight higher. At a town hall held inside a packed high school auditorium, Rochelle stood on stage in a denim jacket and sneakers. No podium, no cue cards. I'm not a politician, she said. I'm a mom. But I'm standing here tonight because our children deserve better than this system that hides behind policies and protects abusers. She told the full story. Layla's alopecia, the journal, the clippers, the humiliation. And then she showed the footage. Not on a news feed, not on a courtroom screen, but live right there in front of 1,000 neighbors, parents, students. The silence after it ended was suffocating. Then a woman in the 3rd row stood up. My son had her, Miss Fitch. She made him feel small for the way he spoke. A man stood too. She told my niece her hair looked like it belonged in the jungle. Then another, and another. One by one, stories poured out like floodwater. When the microphone was passed back to Rochelle, she cleared her throat. You didn't come here tonight for a show. You came for justice. And if the system won't give it to us, we'll build one that will. Afterward, Layla hugged her mother tightly in the parking lot. You didn't walk in this time, she whispered. You stood up. Rochelle smiled through tears. And so did you. From that night on, nothing stayed the same. The whispers became voices, and the voices became a roar. Layla stood in the middle of her bedroom, barefoot on the hardwood floor, staring at the painting she hadn't been able to finish since it all happened. The canvas was half covered, black smears clawed through a mess of gray, the outline of a girl sitting alone on a chair, barely visible beneath the layers of paint. Her hair, or what used to be hair, wasn't there. Just a shadow. Baby, Rochelle's voice came from the doorway, softer than usual. They're waiting downstairs. Layla didn't turn around. Do I have to talk to them? Rochelle stepped inside, wrapping her arms gently around her daughter. Not if you don't want to. But you should know. They're here for you. Every single person in that room is standing because of what you lived through. I didn't do anything, Layla whispered. You're the one who fought. No, Rochelle said, turning her gently to face the mirror. You stood in that chair. You endured something no child ever should. And you're still here. You are the reason this is happening. Downstairs, the living room was packed. Grace Yamada, the civil rights attorney, Detective Yates, Maya and her older sister, Zoe, several local community leaders, even Councilwoman Gloria Sellers, a longtime advocate for education equity. They had gathered to prepare for the public hearing, an emergency school board session that had been forced into existence by the overwhelming outcry. The Monroe family, with Grace's legal expertise and a growing movement behind them, had filed a formal civil rights complaint and requested a full independent review of the district's conduct. "I've gone over the board's bylaws," Grace said to the group. "They've tried to push this off for months. But thanks to the pressure you all applied, parents, former students, media, the meeting's happening tomorrow, and it will be public." Councilwoman Sellers added, "We've secured live stream access, full press attendance, and open mic time. They can't hide behind closed doors anymore." Rochelle sat at the center of the room, listening, nodding. Then she looked at Layla, who had just entered quietly and stood near the staircase. "You sure you're ready?" Rochelle asked gently. Layla hesitated, then with a slow breath, she nodded. "Yeah, I want to tell them what she did, not just to me, but to everyone she made feel small." That night, Rochelle sat on the porch under the porch light, scrolling through her phone. Notifications blinked non-stop. Messages from strangers, parents, students, even former teachers from other districts poured in. Stories of humiliation, of silence, of systems that had failed to protect the most vulnerable. She was about to head back inside when her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. "This is Rochelle Monroe," a low voice answered. "You don't know me, but I used to work under Wexler." The name sent a chill down her spine. "I was in HR, back when Fitch had another complaint filed. We were told to bury it, said it was a misunderstanding. But there's an email between Wexler and the board, explicitly telling us not to escalate." Rochelle sat upright. "Can you send it to us?" "It's in the district archive," the voice replied. "You'll need someone on the inside to pull it, but it's there. Check the 2019 folder. Search for hair distraction policy. That'll bring it up." Then the line went dead. The next morning, Detective Yates met Rochelle and Grace outside the district building. He had pulled strings to secure temporary access under whistleblower protection. Inside the dull gray office space, he navigated to an old, rarely touched database. The system was clunky, dated, and slow, but after 15 tense minutes, he found it. Subject line: RE, repeated violations, recommend non-action. From Principal Wexler. To Board President, HR Director, District Legal. We do not want another media incident. Handle it internally. Students' claims about hair policy can be chalked up to miscommunication. Grace took a photo of the screen, then pulled out her tablet and cross-referenced it with records from Layla's incident. Same language, same tactic, different child. This was no isolated case. Hours later, as they prepared for the hearing, Layla sat in the school's auditorium, staring at the empty rows that would soon be filled with reporters, parents, and board members. She wore a soft yellow wrap around her head, the same color as her first drawing in kindergarten, a sun peeking over a hill. Maya sat beside her. "You nervous?" Layla nodded. "Terrified." "You don't have to be perfect," Maya whispered. "You just have to be honest." When the board session began, the chair tried to open with procedural language, but the crowd wasn't having it. Parents stood up with signs, students whispered and pointed. Reporters typed furiously in real time. Rochelle took the podium first. Her voice was firm, steady. "For months, my daughter has lived with the memory of being humiliated, not just by a teacher, but by a system that allowed it. We brought the truth. You ignored it. But today, that ends." Then she stepped aside. Layla rose slowly, walked to the microphone. At first, she couldn't speak. Then she saw Maya, her mom, Grace, dozens of strangers looking at her, not with pity, but with respect. "I want to tell you about a chair," Layla began, her voice cracking but clear. "In the nurse's office, where I sat while a teacher shaved my head without my permission. While I cried, while she said I looked better this way. Her eyes scanned the board members. You knew she did this before. You let her stay because you didn't want people to see what was broken. A hush fell over the room. Layla ended with one sentence. But we're not broken. You are. And as she stepped back, the auditorium erupted. Not in noise, not in applause, but in stillness, charged, electric, undeniable. Justice wasn't done yet, but it was coming. The gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack that echoed across the courtroom. Judge Holloway, stern and composed, glanced over her glasses at the packed room. Every seat was taken. Some people stood against the walls. Cameras lined the back row. And in the center of it all sat Layla Monroe, her head wrap a deep indigo today, the color of calm before a storm. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Holloway asked. The forewoman stood, a middle-aged black woman with salt and pepper curls and eyes that didn't flinch. We have, Your Honor. A beat, then another. Rochelle's hand tightened around Layla's. Across the aisle, Principal Wexler stared straight ahead, his lips pressed in a flat line. Next to him, Mrs. Fitch looked like a statue, unmoving, unreadable. The forewoman read, In the matter of Monroe versus Wexler, Fitch, and the Midtown School District, on the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find the defendants liable. Gasps. On the count of civil rights violations under Title VI, we find the defendants liable. Murmurs rippled across the room like thunder. On the count of negligence and failure to protect a minor student from foreseeable harm, we find the defendants liable. Layla didn't breathe. And we award damages in the amount of $10 million, with an additional $2 million in punitive damages against the district and personal penalties against Evelyn Fitch and Thomas Wexler. Silence. Then an eruption of emotion. The judge banged her gavel again, but it was drowned out by the swell of voices, reporters whispering into microphones, and spontaneous applause from a corner of the room. Rochelle wrapped her arms around Layla and whispered, You did it, baby. You did it. Grace Yamada exhaled and stood slowly, offering a single firm nod. Justice had spoken. After court, outside the building, dozens of supporters waited. Some held signs, others just wanted to be present, to witness the shift. Rochelle stepped in front of the microphones, Layla beside her. This wasn't just about my daughter, Rochelle began. This was about every child who's ever been silenced, humiliated, or told to shrink themselves to fit into a system that was never built for them. Her voice strengthened. It ends here. Layla stepped forward. Just a few words. Her voice wavered, but her eyes held fire. I don't need to be quiet anymore, and I don't need to hide. What happened to me won't be forgotten. Not because of what they did, but because of what we did in response. That night, the news networks ran the story under various banners. Mother and daughter win landmark civil rights case. Teacher's history of discrimination, finally exposed. Layla Monroe case sparks national policy reform. But what mattered more was the ripple. Emails flooded in, stories from other parents, from students. A teacher in Texas who had faced suspension for standing up to a racist policy. A school counselor in Michigan who thanked Layla for giving her students hope. The Monroe home, once filled with silence and tension, now buzzed with energy. Maya's podcast aired a special episode, When the System Fails, Speak Louder. Layla sat across from her, voice clearer than ever. Rochelle, with the support of Councilwoman Sellers and several advocacy groups, launched a nonprofit called The First Chair, a nod to the chair in the nurse's office where Layla had been humiliated, and now a symbol reclaimed. It focused on legal support, education reform, and mental health recovery for children wronged in schools. Months passed. Mrs. Fitch lost her teaching license. Principal Wexler resigned. The district implemented sweeping reforms, mandatory anti-bias training, restructured complaint procedures, student advocacy councils. Other districts took note, but change wasn't just in policies, it was in perception. Layla returned to school, not Midtown, but a nearby arts-based academy. On her first day, she didn't wear a head wrap. She didn't need to. Her short hair framed her face like a crown. In the hallway, a girl paused her locker combo, then turned. "You're her, right? Layla?" Layla smiled. "Yeah, that's me. Just wanted to say, thanks. You made it easier for girls like me to walk through these halls." That evening, Rochelle watched her daughter sketch in the backyard. The sun dipped low, casting gold across Layla's paper. The drawing was of a tree, strong, branches reaching skyward, and beneath it, a girl with a bald head, arms lifted, smiling toward the light. The journey wasn't over, it never really was. But this chapter had closed with dignity, not because justice always prevailed, but because someone stood up and demanded it. Layla did, and the world listened. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We tell real stories that reflect real struggles and inspire real change. Let's keep amplifying the voices that need to be heard.